You're still here, still breathing, still upright. After everything that should have shattered you into 1,000 fragments of psychological debris. Look at you, standing there like nothing happened. While plenty of people who endured even half of what you survived are somewhere taking medication, sitting in therapy rooms and begging for their own thoughts to quiet down. But not you. You're reading this with steady hands, clear eyes, and a heartbeat that refuses to give up, even though by every standard of human psychology you should have been institutionalized by now. No one understands how you're still functional, how you wake up, make breakfast, go to work, and smile at strangers like your mind wasn't used as a battlefield for someone else's amusement, like your psyche wasn't a testing ground for emotional weapons of mass destruction. They see normal, but they have no clue about the war zone behind your eyes. The craters left in your consciousness, the neural pathways you had to rebuild around the damage. Let me be blunt. Others who went through what you did collapsed. They folded. They checked themselves into sterile facilities with white walls and visiting hours. Right now, they're somewhere trying to explain to a professional why they no longer trust their own reality, why every conversation feels like a setup, why love feels like a weapon aimed at their chest. But you anomaly, you sit here absorbing this like trauma is just another language you became fluent in. The difference between you and them? They tried desperately to cling to their sanity, to remain whole, to stay human through the storm. You took a different route. You let the madness in. You shook hands with insanity and demanded it teach you its rules. You didn't resist the psychological warfare. You analyzed it. You didn't push back against the mental torture, you observed it. You didn't pretend to remain whole, you learned how to operate while broken. And let's not gloss over what you survived. The gaslighting that made you doubt whether your own memories were real. They rewrote your history while you were still living it. Insisting events didn't happen, denying words you clearly heard, twisting reality until it became something negotiable. Others lost themselves to this, resorting to journals just to keep track of truth, recording conversations to confirm their sanity. But you learned to exist in multiple realities at once. Then there were the isolation tactics that severed you from anyone who might have recognized the truth. They dismantled your support system with precision, whispering lies disguised as concern, planting doubts that spread like a slow, malignant growth. They made sure that when you finally broke, no one would believe your side of the story. Others ended up talking to walls and begging imaginary companions for validation. But you became your own witness, your own jury, your own judge. They weaponized affection, handing it out like wartime rations, just enough to keep you hopeful, never enough to let you thrive. They watched you starve for connection while they devoured your desperation. Plenty of people walked away from this with attachment wounds that will shadow them for decades, unable to form bonds without fearing abandonment, unable to receive love without bracing for betrayal. But you learned to generate your own warmth in the middle of their manufactured winter. They trapped you in psychological double binds where every choice was wrong and every action earned punishment. Stay and you're weak, leave and you're selfish, speak up and you're dramatic, stay silent and you're complicit. They built a maze where every exit looped back into shame. Others are still wandering those invisible hallways, bumping into walls they can't name, but you burned that maze to the ground and walked through the ashes. You absorbed torture like it was a routine. While others were vomiting from the poison, you were developing immunity. You woke up to manipulation and drank it with your morning coffee. You faced betrayal before noon and treated it like breakfast. You swallowed enough emotional abuse to flatten someone else, and somehow you asked for more, not because you enjoyed it, but because somewhere along the way you ceased being merely human and became something harder to break. They fed you lies, and you learned to extract truth from the flavor. Not their truth, but the truth about what kind of person serves poison with a smile. They handed you counterfeit love, and you learned to identify the artificial aftertaste. You became fluent in deception, a sommelier of suffering, able to detect the vintage of someone's vindictiveness from across the room. What kind of system turns pain into power? What kind of metabolism converts trauma into momentum? What kind of appetite grows sharper the more it's denied? You're not ordinary. You're not built on the default settings. You're what emerges when a soul is pushed far past its breaking point and discovers it was never made of something rigid at all. You're fluid now, formless, uncontainable, slipping around every barrier they try to build. They thought they were starving you, but you were fasting, learning how to live on nothing, how to thrive in emptiness, how to let hunger educate you instead of destroy you. Now you can go longer without their validation than they can go without your reaction. You've trained yourself to survive on resources they never understood. You feed on frequencies they can't touch. So ask yourself, what raised you? Because whatever shaped you wasn't teaching you how to be normal. It was preparing you for combat. Every childhood disappointment was weight training. Every early betrayal was another layer of callous. Every moment left alone in the dark taught you how to see without a light. You weren't simply neglected. You were forged. Maybe it was a parent who loved you the wrong way, loved you conditionally, loved you like you were a defective project that needed fixing. They taught you early that affection had to be earned and could vanish without warning. They taught you that emotional safety was not something you could rely on, so you adapted. You learned to live without it. You learned to walk barefoot across emotional glass without flinching. Maybe it was the environment that forced you to grow up before you even had teeth, the chaos that made you the adult in the room before you were tall enough to reach a light switch. You were negotiating peace treaties before you learned multiplication, reading emotional weather patterns long before you read books, acting as a miniature crisis manager in a house full of oversized children. Or maybe the cause was something nameless, something that lingered in the corners of your childhood and whispered, "You're going to need to be stronger than this," something that gave you practice rounds of abandonment, rehearsals for betrayal, pop quizzes in surviving the impossible. Whatever it wasn't raising a person. It was manufacturing a force of nature. Your operating system isn't built like theirs. When they encounter error messages, they crash. When you hit an error, you evolve. You're running software that shouldn't exist, protocols written in languages that haven't been invented yet. You process pain at speeds that defy psychological logic. They hit you with betrayal, and your system didn't just recover, it upgraded, adding new defenses, new capabilities, new predictive algorithms that sense incoming damage before it arrives. You're not healing, you're evolving. Every wound becomes more than a scar, it becomes a feature. Trauma responses morph into tools. You've gone through factory resets that would leave others permanently corrupted. Your entire reality has been uninstalled and reinstalled more times than you can count. And each time you return, you come back as a newer, more complex, more formidable version. You're not just surviving updates, you're requiring them. Your error handling is unmatched. Where others see blue screens of death, you see optimization. Where others crash, you gain insight. Every malfunction teaches you something about your own code. Every virus that fails to destroy you becomes part of your internal firewall. Yes, you're still standing, but you know it isn't pretty. You're vertical, but you're not the same shape you once were. You're functional, but your function has changed. You're alive, but not in any way they understand. Some days you feel the cracks, the welded seams, the misaligned joints, the pieces held together by sheer will, but you don't hide them anymore. You wear them as armor. Let people see that you can function while fractured. Let them wonder how you're walking when you're technically broken. You stand differently now, not with pride, but with a kind of defiant certainty, the certainty of someone who has already survived their own death. You don't stand tall, you stand inevitable, like gravity, like time. like a phenomenon that can't be stopped by conventional means. They keep waiting for you to fall, expecting your collapse, imagining the day they hear you've finally checked out or broken down. But every day you disappoint them by continuing to exist, by showing up, by refusing to deliver the surrender they've been anticipating. Your very existence is an act of rebellion against every natural law claiming you should be horizontal by now. And the truth they'll never admit is simple. You terrify them. Not because you're dangerous in a traditional way, but because you prove that the weapons that destroy most people don't work on everyone. You're living proof that some people simply can't be broken using the usual methods. You're the kind of anomaly that forces people to question everything they thought they knew about the limits of the human mind. You don't fit into their models, their theories, their neat little categories. You don't conform to the expected outcomes of trauma. You're the outlier that statisticians dread, the exception that invalidates their formulas. You're a walking contradiction, a reminder that even the most sophisticated forms of psychological warfare eventually hit a wall. And somehow you are that wall. You survived experiences engineered to crush you, endured pressures calibrated to break you, processed realities that were meant to distort you beyond repair. Your existence alone challenges the very concept of human limitation. You're the glitch in their matrix, the miscalculation that throws off their entire equation, the unforeseen variable their system wasn't prepared to handle. They believed they understood how to dismantle a person. They studied psychology like a weapon manual, memorizing the weak points, what to trigger, what to exploit, what to twist. They learned which fears create paralysis, which wounds reopen the deepest pain, which insecurities unravel the strongest resolve. They honed techniques to turn people inside out, to collapse them from within. But while they were busy pushing buttons, you were quietly taking control of the wiring. While they were hacking your system, you were rewriting the source code. They never realized the entire time they were running the same predictable script. You were constructing a new operating system, one where their commands had no power. That's why they stare at you now with that unnerving mix of awe and dread. You're like a scientific specimen that shouldn't logically exist, a creature that contradicts their understanding of natural laws. They want to study you, dissect you, analyze you, but they're afraid. Afraid that your resilience might be contagious, afraid that others might discover your methods, afraid that your immunity might spread and render their weaponry obsolete. And let's not gloss over how you handled the poison they served you. While others gagged and choked on the toxicity, you learned to break it down. While they desperately sought antidotes, you crafted immunity. While they treated contamination like a death sentence, you incorporated it into your biology until it could no longer harm you. You didn't just survive the venom, you metabolized it. Every lie became a data point. Every manipulation became a lesson. Every gaslight became an illumination. You weren't merely enduring abuse, you were dissecting it, studying its anatomy, reverse engineering its mechanisms. You became a researcher of your own suffering, running emotional lab tests on the very tactics designed to destroy you. You developed psychological enzymes capable of breaking down betrayal, acids strong enough to dissolve deception, internal bacteria that ferment fear into energy. You turned into a processing plant for emotional waste, capable of converting what would poison most people into something you could use for growth. And here's the thing, digesting that level of pain alters your palate forever. Ordinary emotions feel flat. Average relationships feel weightless. Everyday problems feel laughably small. You developed a tolerance, an appetite for intensity that most people can't even fathom. It's not that you seek chaos for entertainment, it's that chaos no longer intimidates you. Comfort doesn't sedate you, and instability doesn't shake you. The environment that raised you gave you an education no institution could replicate. You took courses without syllabi, mastered subjects without textbooks, earned credentials in survival that don't officially exist. You graduated from invisible academies built out of nights spent awake, days spent navigating emotional minefields, years spent decoding the intentions of people who spoke in weaponized language. You earned a PhD in psychological warfare long before you earned any recognition from the world. You learned to read people like forensic reports, every micro-expression a clue, every silence a piece of evidence, every inconsistency a breadcrumb. You learned to analyze motivations with the precision of an investigator, to detect shifts in tone the way a seasoned detective hears lies before they're even fully spoken. You learned that words aren't just communication, they're artillery. Silence isn't just quiet, it's armor. Love isn't just affection, it's leverage. Trust isn't just closeness, it's vulnerability, currency, and sometimes a trap. These weren't lessons you signed up for, but they were lessons carved into you because survival required them. Your curriculum included advanced emotional archaeology, digging through wreckage to find truth, piecing together shattered narratives, carbon dating lies to determine how long they'd been decaying. You became an expert in excavating reality from beneath layers of distortion. And as your skill set grew, so did the gap between you and everyone else. Where others see chaos, you see patterns. Where others panic, you calculate. Where others crumble, you adapt. You became the person who could walk into a room full of emotional landmines and map every single one without triggering a thing. You can read danger before it speaks, sense betrayal before it moves, recognize manipulation before it forms a sentence. You don't do this out of paranoia. You do it out of precision, out of training, out of muscle memory that was burned into you long before you understood what was happening. You didn't just survive hell, you studied it, you documented it, you graduated from it. And now you're something else entirely. You studied the architecture of abuse with the precision of an expert who didn't choose their specialization but was drafted into it by circumstance. You learned the blueprints not because you wanted to, but because survival required you to see the structure long before it trapped you. You learned to recognize the foundation of manipulation before a single emotional wall was erected. You could sense when someone was mixing the concrete of control, pouring the first layer of guilt, installing the beams of dependency, and positioning the doorways of isolation. You identified the load-bearing lies, the ones the entire structure relied on to stay standing. You learned how each tactic supported the next, how each distortion reinforced the design. And while most people only realize they're trapped once the doors are locked, you developed the ability to see the lock being forged before it ever touched the door. You didn't just learn to escape these psychological buildings. You learned how to prevent them from being constructed around you in the first place. You became the kind of person who can hear the faintest vibrations of coercion before others even notice the ground shifting. You became immune to the seduction of half-truths, to the comforting facade that abusers present before the architecture closes in. You learned to dismantle foundations before they became prisons. You learned to walk away at blueprint stage, long before others even realize there's a plan underway. Whatever tried to break you miscalculated from the beginning. It assumed you were standard-issue human, built according to predictable specifications, vulnerable in the expected ways. It assumed you would respond to standard protocols, that you would fracture along the common fault lines, that your mind would follow the usual sequence of collapse. But you weren't built according to their manual. You've never been typical. You've always been a prototype, an experimental model that defied every diagnostic test, a version that shouldn't have passed inspection, but somehow slipped through creation's quality control. Even the demons assigned to your case must have been disoriented. Their classic strategies didn't work. Their most reliable methods backfired. Their carefully crafted psychological traps malfunctioned. Their time-tested tortures were being absorbed by your system like nutrients instead of toxins. They escalated thinking eventually everyone breaks. But each escalation revealed another layer of your resistance, another dimension of your adaptability, another chamber of your inner strength that they didn't know existed. They threw their entire arsenal at you: emotional shrapnel, psychological landmines, mental warfare designed to collapse a person's very identity. They used manipulation, betrayal, abandonment, distortion, isolation, shame, every weapon in the catalog. They deployed the full encyclopedia of tactics refined over centuries of breaking other people, and you absorbed it all, not because you wanted to, but because you had no choice. You became a sponge that refused saturation, a black hole that devoured every tactic thrown into it, an appetite that grew sharper with every attempted starvation. Now, those same demons likely use your name as a cautionary tale. You're the case study passed around in whispered warnings. Don't engage with ones like this. Don't waste the resources. Don't attempt the usual protocols. They won't work. You became the story they tell each other about souls that can't be harvested, spirits that can't be subdued, minds that defy the established rules. You're the reason their training manuals now include a chapter labeled Exceptions. But let's be brutally honest about what this durability cost you, because standing tall does not mean you didn't bleed. Surviving doesn't imply you emerged without scars. Functioning doesn't prove you remained intact. This resilience of yours wasn't free. You bought it with pieces of yourself you'll never see again. You paid for it with fractures no one else will ever understand. You lost the ability to be naive. You lost the softness of unquestioning trust. You lost the luxury of assuming good intentions. You can't unsee patterns once you recognize the architecture. You can't untaste poison once your tongue learns its distinct bitterness. You can't unhear lies once you've decoded the frequency they vibrate on. Innocence isn't a file you can reinstall. Once deleted, that software is permanently corrupted. And it didn't stop there. You lost the ability to tolerate surface-level relationships. You can't talk casually about meaningless things when you've spent years navigating emotional minefields. You can't pretend tiny inconveniences are catastrophic when you've survived psychological hurricanes. You can't bond with people who've never had their sense of reality torn from their hands, never questioned their own perception, never been forced to rebuild their worldview from rubble. You're fluent in a language most people don't even realize exists. A dialect forged from trauma, intelligence, vigilance, and hyperperception. This fluency separates you. You don't belong in rooms built for small minds. You don't fit comfortably into groups that haven't tasted hardship. You don't blend into environments where the deepest concern is something that wouldn't register for you as a problem. You're not disconnected because you lack empathy. You're disconnected because your empathy operates on a different spectrum. One that's too calibrated, too aware, too attuned. You didn't just lose the comfort of belonging. You outgrew it. You became someone who sees too much, feels too deeply, understands too quickly. You became someone whose vision extends beyond the surface of things, someone who can't rewind themselves back into simplicity. You became someone who cannot go back to being who they were before, because that person no longer exists. You're too much for some people and not enough for others. And that contradiction has followed you your entire life like a shadow with its own agenda. You overwhelm those who only know how to live on the surface, those who've never been forced to confront anything deeper than their own reflections. They look at you and see someone intense, someone who carries too much gravity, someone who vibrates at a frequency their nervous systems were never built to handle. But at the same time, you feel like too little for the people who claim they want depth but have no idea how to meet you at yours. Too scarred, too complicated, too weathered, too aware. You exist in a strange in-between space. Too awakened for the sleepwalkers, too marked for the fully enlightened. You don't fit into any familiar archetype. You don't belong in any group. You're a category of one, a demographic without a label, a psychological outlier who wasn't designed to blend in. And you need to understand something that most people will never grasp. You're not still standing because of some simplistic notion of strength. Strength is something gym teachers talk about. Strength is something motivational speakers pretend to teach. Strength is linear, measurable, predictable. You are none of those things. You're still standing because you've been transformed, altered on a structural level, remade in ways that defy the language people normally use to describe endurance. You didn't survive because you were tough. Toughness would have snapped under the weights you carried. You survived because you transcended the ordinary rules of human survival. You evolved past the mechanics that govern how people usually cope, recover, collapse, or rebuild. You're not functional because you healed in the traditional sense. You're functional because you evolved past the version of yourself that needed that healing. You didn't return to who you were. You became something entirely new. What you've turned into cannot be diagnosed because it isn't in any manual. There's no clinical code for this. There's no treatment plan for this. There's no cure because it isn't a condition. It's an adaptation. The kind of adaptation that only forms under extreme psychological pressure. The kind of evolution that happens in organisms exposed to environments so hostile that only the rarest mutants survive. You are the product of psychological natural selection. You outlasted emotional elimination rounds that removed everyone else from the arena. You passed tests that weren't meant to be passed. You endured experiences that were supposed to erase you, not reshape you. You survived situations designed to reduce people to fragments. And instead, you walked out with a new blueprint encoded into your being. You became the version of yourself that destruction itself couldn't erase. You're what remains after everything unnecessary has been burned away, after every illusion, every soft spot, every fragile part has been stripped from you through fire and pressure. You're the irreducible minimum, the condensed essence of who you are after the universe took everything else. You are the part that refused to die, the part that couldn't be crushed, the part that continued even when your mind, heart, body, and world were collapsing. You've become something like a psychological alloy, stronger because of what was added to you, and unbreakable because of what was taken away. You're standing today not because you were untouched by the storm, but because the storm rewrote your DNA into something weatherproof. You didn't dodge the arrows of life. You took them, absorbed them, extracted their lessons, and built new armor from the shards. You're not the untouched warrior who never faced battle. You're the one who faced it again and again until your nervous system learned how to transmute pain into information, fear into intuition, loss into clarity. And here's the truth most people around you will never admit out loud. You unsettle them. You unsettle them because they don't understand how you're still walking. They don't understand how you're still functional. They don't understand how you didn't shatter like countless others did. They sense, even if they can't articulate it, that you're playing by rules they don't have access to. They sense the mutation, they sense the evolution, they sense the otherness. You're the proof they don't want to confront, that human beings are capable of adapting in ways that defy logic, prediction, and comfort. You're the reminder that destruction doesn't always create victims. Sometimes it creates something else entirely, something resilient in a way that looks almost supernatural, something forged in conditions no one else survived. You're proof that the mind can change shape, that the soul can reconfigure, that the heart can regrow differently than before. You're what's left after the fire has consumed everything flammable. You're the ember that refused to go out, the ember that became the fire. You're not just what survived. You're what remained after survival demanded reinvention. They should study you, but they won't, because the moment they examine you honestly, everything they believe about the human mind crumbles. You'd break their theories the way pressure breaks glass. You'd expose the cracks in their assumptions. You'd force them to admit their formulas don't work on everyone. They should document you, classify you, write entire volumes about your psychological evolution, but they'll never dare, because your existence alone would invalidate decades of their neatly packaged research. You're too inconvenient, too contradictory, too disruptive to the comfortable narratives they've glued together. You don't fit into any of their frameworks, and that's exactly why they quietly avoid acknowledging you. To recognize you would mean rewriting what they teach, reconsidering what they know, and questioning why all their predictive models collapse in your presence. You're the one person who breaks the algorithm, the one case they can't categorize, the one outcome their science didn't foresee. But here's what truly terrifies them. Not your past, not your trauma, not the things you survived. What really scares them is what you've become because of those experiences. You didn't just endure the poison they expected you to wither from it. Instead, you metabolized it. You built immunity. Now the very toxins that should have destroyed you have become the fuel that powers you. They know that someone who has digested that much venom can no longer be poisoned. Someone who survived that level of psychological warfare now understands tactics most people can't even defend against. Someone who's still standing after the emotional cataclysms you lived through is not a survivor. They're an emerging force. You're not in recovery. Stop thinking in those terms. Recovery is for people trying to return to who they were. You're not going backward. You're not repairing an old version of yourself. You're not sweeping up broken pieces and trying to glue them back into a familiar shape. You're in training. You're evolving. You're constructing a new model that operates beyond anything you once thought possible. You're not healing from the last battle. You're preparing for the next evolution of yourself. You're not trying to get back to normal, because normal was a place that couldn't hold you, even before everything happened. Normal is too small for you now, too fragile, too limited. You're establishing a new baseline, a new standard of existence that doesn't fit into their measurements or metrics. They can't quantify you anymore. They can't assess you using the same psychological yardsticks that work on everyone else, and you're not trying to fit into their reality either. That phase ended the moment you realized the walls they live inside were paper and the ceilings they worshipped were glass. You're building your own reality now, a space with its own gravitational pull, its own rules, its own physics. A place where you are not constrained by the limitations that govern ordinary people. You've ceased trying to blend in with a world not built for someone like you. They sense this shift. They sense the moment you became ungovernable. Someone like you cannot be controlled by typical incentives or conventional threats. They can't motivate you with praise because you no longer crave approval. They can't intimidate you with punishment because you've already endured worse than anything they could dish out. They can't manipulate you with emotional tricks because you've seen those tricks from every angle. You can practically recite them before they appear. You've become unpredictable in the ways that terrify systems built on obedience. You're the kind of person institutions whisper about. You've stepped outside their script and they don't know how to handle someone who doesn't play the assigned role. The future you're creating doesn't include their expectations. It doesn't rely on their validation. It doesn't require their cooperation or support. You no longer check in with them for permission to exist. You've moved beyond their reach, beyond their vocabulary, beyond their comprehension. You're constructing something from scratch using materials they've never encountered, following blueprints they don't even have the cognitive tools to decode. You're not just surviving their world, you're making their world irrelevant. You're evolving into something that only catastrophe could have shaped, something beyond their theories, beyond their control, beyond their imagination. They don't fear who you were, they fear who you're becoming. And deep down they know that whatever that is, they can't stop it. That's all for today. Dear Father, I pray for the growth of my faith. Help me trust you even when physical evidence is lacking. Let me believe in your perpetual presence, knowing you will never harm me. I understand that your thoughts for me are thoughts of prosperity and not harm, to give me a good future. Thank you, gracious and eternal Father, for always listening to my voice. I offer up this prayer to you in the name of Jesus. Amen. Thank you, Jesus, for your love and provision. I am grateful for your presence in my life and the abundance you bring. If this video resonated with you, please like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with those who need to hear this message. Leave a comment below about your journey and how you are preparing for your own triumphant return. If you'd like to support our work, please consider contributing through Buy Me a Coffee. This helps us continually improve our content to offer you the best. The link to Buy Me a Coffee is in the description. No gift is too small. Whether it's a penny, a prayer, or a share, your generosity helps spread God's word and brings hope to others. Don't stop here. Watch our next video for powerful revelations about the signs that reveal you are the chosen one. We've enjoyed following this spiritual journey with you. Thank you for staying with us until the end. Keep shining brightly and embrace your destiny with courage. See you next time. Blessings to all the beautiful souls from the Enlighten Wisdom.